you're appointed by Governor Pataki at that time. He was the governor, and the appointments to the Park Commission are made by the governor. There are 11 regions in New York State, and we're the Allegany region, which encompasses, at that time, when I was appointed, Allegany State Park, Lake Erie State Park, and Long Point State Park. And in 2004, shortly thereafter, we added Midway State Park, which is pretty well known in this area.
Been active all your life in areas of outdoor sports and outdoor recreation. That comes natural.
It does, and I think that's why I enjoy it so much, because I grew up, we owned a sporting goods store. So we had hunting and fishing, and we had a boat marina, and there was boats, motors, and hunting and fishing equipment, and we just, you know, I came by it naturally, as did my family, and it was a big deal. You know, we all would get together and hunt deer, you know, the old-fashioned New England, where all the guys were out at the camp and that sort of thing.
Of the park system in New York State?
Well, at this point, it's not very good, and not through any fault of the parks. It's through the fault of this meltdown, economic meltdown that took place. I guess there's a lot of people have different ideas who's to blame for it, but one entity I can tell you is the parks. And we have about a $355 million budget, and the parks generate about 43% of their own money for operations. So we're one of the few agencies, I think, in New York State government, we're not the only one certainly, but that, you know, contribute to our own budget without having to go to the general fund for all of it. But and about 2 years ago, we were able to get $100 million as one of 6, as a down payment on hopefully 6 years of $100 million from the state in a funding, they have their own funding ways of doing it, to rebuild the infrastructure of the parks. The parks were, as you know, if you go, the bridges are in trouble. We have issues with septic, water. We have to bring every facility up to handicap standards. And it's, well, it just hasn't been the money in the budget. So finally, we, all of the chairmen of each commission went and lobbied about 2 years ago, along with, you know, the staff, the head of staff of the parks, and we're able to get a promise that we would get that funding over a period of several years, not all at once. And we've invested about close to $200 million into infrastructure now, which was sadly needed. But with this crisis now, we're on a hold. I mean, it isn't going to happen for a period of time, and we don't know when. But I think it's important for people to understand that 55 million people go through our parks. We have about 178 state parks and 35 historic sites. We are the New York State Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation Commission. So anything historic that's set aside as a historical site is done through our oversight. And we process all grants for municipalities on behalf of the state or federal government. So if a city wanted a grant for a city park, for example, or to rehabilitate a park, that grant application would come through us, along with a lot of other ones. And so it's a pretty big entity, agency. But I think everybody knows the parks through the 178 plus parks that are out there that they use day in and day out. And I think I said 55 million people go through those parks every year. And they generate, the parks generate, not for the parks, but the peripheral businesses, $1.9 billion in revenue for the surrounding businesses. And you say, well, how do you know that? Well, the University of Massachusetts undertook a study, and they determined that about $1.9 million is generated outside of the parks by people going to the parks. And so that's an awful lot of money, and it's a 5-to-1 ratio. For every dollar that's the state invests in the parks, there's a $5 return to the businesses surrounding the park. So it's, I mean, it makes sense. let alone the aesthetics and why people go to parks.
Sure.
We've been asked to try to mobilize people to write in to Governor Patterson especially, and their assembly and senators, state senators and state assembly people, to ask them when the budget comes up to please, everybody's going to have to take a hit, Greg. I mean, we've already taken a 20% hit in 2008, 2009 up to this point. They're asking us to take another 11% hit. That's over almost a third of our budget, and that's going to necessitate closing down parks. There's no other options. Right. We've trimmed the we've between seasonal employees, and of course the parks operate mostly are big in the summer, so we have a lot of seasonal employees, about 2,100, or about 5,000, and there's 2,100 permanent employees, and we've lost in total 850 employees as a result of these cutbacks. I mean, how much more can we trim? When you think of it, even with 2,100 full-time employees, divide that into 178 parks and 35 historical sites. There isn't a lot of people involved in the management of these parks in terms of the density of something like the state tax department, where you have so many people involved in it. I mean, we really operate on a fairly thin employee basis to maintain all those parks. And there's a lot involved in it, besides security and the maintenance of the parks, the maintenance, the restoration, the roads, plowing, and everything that goes with that. It's an awful lot of work. Anyone who's really interested in keeping these parks as open as we can keep them, and to keep them in operation as best we can with our present budget, contact Governor Patterson and ask that he doesn't hit us any harder with what we've already been hit with in terms of the 20% reduction. His address is the Honorable David Patterson, it's one T, P-A-T-E-R-S-O-N, Executive Chamber, New York State Capitol, Albany, New York, 12224, 3 2s. And he, if anyone would like to help in this endeavor, that's the letter to write, really, at this point. It would be wonderful to write Senator Kathy Young in this area, Assemblyman Giglio, or Bill Parment locally, depending on who your assemblyman is, and ask also for their support, and to also, send support to Governor Patterson to hold the line for us, if we can. It's important to all of us. I think there's a quality of life out there that over the years we kind of lost, and you can go to the parks. Allegany's the largest park east of the Mississippi, 65,000 acres, and you can go there and get lost. Mm-hmm. And you'll see a primordial forest. I mean, it was logged 75 years ago, but it's about as primordial as you'll find, and then there's wonderful areas full of wildlife. Mm-hmm. And I think people need that opportunity to go to a place like that or any of the other parks and bike or, kayak or cross-country ski. We have 40-some miles at Allegany of horse trails. People don't realize that. And people come, and we actually have places where they can fence in their horses for the night. And so there's so many diverse recreational opportunities at Allegany, and each park is a little different, but they all have something to offer. You hate to see it close. Yeah.
Terrific.
Okay.
This is great.
Well, thank you for letting me get my message out.
Oh, that's great.